We're up to Daf Yud Ches Hamid Beis, actually the very beginning of the Amud, and we're talking about a Shomeres Yavam, which means, let's say, there were three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, and two of them married two sisters. Let's say Reuven married Rachel and Shimon married Leah. He gives a different example. Again, with the names, it always switches around. He writes that Levi married Rachel. Okay. Levi is like the youngest of the brothers. He married Rachel, and he dies without children. So Rachel now falls for Yibum in front of Reuven and Shimon. And then Shekidesh Achiv es Achosa. In other words, before Yibum would take place, Reuven marries Leah. And this is what we call Maimer, right? Because we're talking about a case in the Filul Yibum, right? Levi died and Rachel fell for Yibum. And now one of the two brothers, the Yevamot, right, of which we call Reuven and Shimon, one of them we'll call him Reuven, he went ahead, he was Mekadesh Leah. Now, as a result of marrying Leah, he makes it impossible, not only for him, but really for Shimon, in a sense. Why? Because now what happens is, let's read Rabbi Yehuda, and then we'll clarify it. Bishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omrim Lo, we're going to say to Reuven, wait a second, you were Makadish, but hold your horses. Hamtain, delay the actual consummation of the marriage, what we call Nitsuin with Leah, until Shimon will choose between Yibum and Chalitza with regard to Rachel, the sister of your wife Leah that had Erisin but not Nisuin. Why? Because as long as Rachel is still what we call Zkuka L'Yibum, then if Reuven would consummate the marriage with Leah, so that would be tantamount to being a fatal in midst of Yibum vis-a-vis Leah. I'm sorry, vis-a-vis Rachel, I meant to say. After a Rachel falls for Yibum, Reuven as well, and so now we have a principle called Yesh Zika. What does Yesh Zika mean? That we view the relationship between Rachel and Reuven in this case as a quasi-marriage relationship. It's not a full-fledged marriage, but it's a Zika marriage. That's called Yesh Zika. Now, as a result, Leah is Achos Ishto, not really Ishto, but Achos Kukasa. He writes, Afsha Yevama Asura Olav, Mishum Achos Ishto, Adain he's Kukasa. Lefisha Ein Kiddushe Leah Achosa Shali Achar Nefila Mafkim Es Zikasa. Because if, let's say, Reuven had married Leah before the Nefila for Yibum, then Rachel would be out of the picture of Nefila Yibum, because she would be Achos Ishto. But there was a Nefila for Yibum. Rachel fell for Yibum to Reuven before Reuven married Leah. And now you might say, well, Reuven went ahead and he was Mekadesh Leah with Kedushin, not with Nisuin. So that kiddushin is not enough to be mafkia zika, which means that Rachel is kuka to Reuven. And even though Reuven went ahead and he married her sister Leah, but it was only Erisin, and if it was only Erisin, that's not strong enough to be mafkia the zika. And therefore, if he would go ahead and marry Leah, then he's removing Rachel from the zika, which would have required chalitza, at least chalitza, if not yibum, because maybe after kiddushin that's enough to prohibit yibum, but it wouldn't prohibit chalitza because she's still skuk of omedes. Yomer Shmuel halacha to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Now, on the previous Amud, which was in Chesam and Aleph, the Gemara had quoted a statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that Yesh Zika. Let's just get the names right here. A second. Right. So let's get the names here. Rav Yehuda on Daf Yud Zayin on the Beis was of the opinion that Yesh Zika. Abai says that it wasn't Rav Yehuda who said it on his own, Yesh Zika, but rather he said it in the name of Shmuel. Now, this contradicts a different tradition that Rabbi Yehuda was saying it in the name of Rav. Again, there are a lot of technicalities here which I'm sort of going to de-emphasize. But if you just follow the following issue, the question is, Rabbi Yehuda who holds Yesh Zika, did he say it in the name of Rav or in the name of Shmuel? Rabbi Yehuda was a Talmud of Shmuel. And therefore, Abaye is pushing to conclude that Rabbi Yehuda was saying it in the name of Shmuel, not like the original transmission in the name of Rav. And Abaye wants to prove that, in fact, Shmuel does hold Yesh Zika from the fact that Shmuel passes like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Now, what is it in Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that indicates Yesh Zika? Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is going to tell him Hamtein, the Al Yichnos, right, addressing Reuven that he shouldn't marry Leah because by doing so he's marrying Achos Kukasa, meaning, and we view that Zika to Rachel as a quasi-marriage situation. That's called Yesh Zika, and therefore he can't marry her sister. So don't marry Leah. Now, what is this Hamtein business? What are you waiting for? What you're waiting for is for Shimon to be B'Yavim Rachel. Now, once Shimon is B'Yavim Rachel, the Zika between Rachel and Reuven is completely gone. And now, Reuven is, free, free sailing. He can now marry Leah because Leah is not Achos Kukasa because the Zika terminated. But if he would go ahead and marry Leah before Shimon is miyabim or choletz Rachel, then because of the principle of Yesh Zika, Reuven would be violating the Isur of Achos Kukaso, and that's based on Yesh Zika. So we see that Shmuel, by paskening like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, is accepting the position, the Shita of Yesh Zika, and therefore says Abaye, when Rabbi Yehuda quoted somebody as holding Yesh Zika, it was probably Shmuel, because that was Rabbi Yehuda's Rebbe, and we know that, and we know in fact that Shmuel holds Yesh Zika. So don't say it Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, but rather say Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. That's the technicality.
The brother was Choletz, but not Miyam.
I didn't hear you. Who was Choletz?
The brother is Choletz instead of Miyam. The Zika's gone.
Gone.
He could, if one brother is Choletz, can't the other brother Miyam?
Absolutely not. That's an Isur Kores. It's Machlok Shvi Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. It's an Isur Kores or an Isur La. No, I think everybody agrees that as far as the other brother, it's an Isur Kores.
As long as one brother doesn't actually, everybody else is off.
Right. And you know that I teach you Mamas a little bit later on. We're learning the 10th parak, and there we're going to learn in the 10th parak that if one brother does a mimer, which means he says to the Yevama Harei Mekudeshesli B'Kesef or B'Shtar, without beer, then that already is enough. Well, that's the Rabbanon to create an Isra on the other Ach. Even mimer is enough. That's called the language of the Mishnah later on. Oslo l'shara ach. And the sugi that we're learning in the next year, that has to do with a katan ben tes, whether we recognize his mimer or not. If we do, then if he jumped the gun and he said Arei Mekudesh sleep to the Yavama, then none of the other achim could be Makayim the mitzvah of Yibum. They'll need chalitza because otherwise she can't get married to anyone. All right. Anyway. Amalei, so Rabbi Yosef responds to Abai, the Rav Mai. What is bothering you? In other words, it's very nice to assume that Rabbi Yehuda is saying it in the name of his Rebbe Shmuel and maintaining that Yesh Zika. But why are you making such a kicking up all the dust here? What's your objection to the original formulation that Rabbi Yehuda was saying it in the name of Rav? And this is a rhetorical question. Rabbi Yosef is going to answer this question. He's Ke'ilu going to defend Abaye that Rav is not the right man for the job here, because in Ken Kasha Rav ad Rav. Now, what's the Kasha de Rav under Rav? So the Kasha de Rav under Rav is because earlier, I think it was Rav Huna, if I'm not mistaken, just get the names. Yeah, Rav Huna. Rav Huna said in the name of Rav that if, let's say, if Rachel, the daughter of Sarah, falls for Yibum to Reuven, Reuven's allowed to marry Sarah, Yevamah's mother. And that would only make sense if you hold Ein Zika. Because if you hold Yesh Zika, then the Torah says that Chamoso is an Erev, so you would not be able to marry his mother-in-law. But Rav says he's allowed to marry her, and why? Because Ein Zika. Says Rabbi Yosef, if that's what bothers you, Rav, that's not a valid argument. Why? Dilma Moroi Minu Valiba de Rav. Again, this is part of the technicality of the sugya, but the Gemara is suggesting that although Rav Huna quotes Rav as saying Ein Zika, but what's his name? That's Rav Huna. But we're talking about Rav Yehuda. Okay, I got it right this time. But Rabbi Yehuda had a different tradition in the name of Rav. So it's very logical, it's very plausible that there were two different traditions as to what Rav held. Now, your Ba'al Abai by Rav Huna's presentation of Rav to the tune of Ein Zika, it could be that Rav Yehuda had a different tradition in the name of Rav that Yesh Zika. So don't get all excited. So the Gemara answers, came into Itmar Mishmei to Shmuel Beheder. But since we know that Shmuel himself explicitly, by possibly like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, in the case of telling Reuven not to marry Leah until after the Zika to Rachel is completely removed, then it makes a lot of sense to say that Shmuel, that Rabbi Yehuda was quoting the halacha of Yesh Zika in the name of his Rabbi Shmuel. Mishmei de Rav Kamaroi Lo Shavkinan, Mishmei de Shmuel Behedja, Umokmina Maroi Al Liba de Rav. In other words, we're in a choice situation over here. You have two options. You can either say that Rav Yehuda was quoting this halacha in the name of Shmuel, and that's called Yesh Zika, and Rav held Ein Zika. Your other alternative is to say that Rav Yehuda was saying it in the name of Rav, and then you have to say that there's machlokas amoraim about what Rav Shita is. And therefore, the Gemara is basically arguing that it makes a lot more sense to attribute this halacha to Shmuel, because we know that Shmuel holds Yesh Zika, rather than make a big plukta about what Rav holds, because we know that Rav holds Ein Zika. So now you're going to say, well, Rav Yehuda had a different tradition in the name of Rav to the effect that Yesh Zika. Omer Rav Kahana, Amrita Lishmaita Kamid Rav Svid Minarda. So I presented this sugi Rav Yehuda to Rav Svid. Amali, and he responded to me, Atuna Hachi Masti Saleh. You have your tradition of Rav Yehuda, in which case Rav Yehuda was not exactly outspoken and explicit about who holds that you cannot marry the mother of a Shomeres Yavam. Anon behejem astis and Om Rav Yehuda Meshmuel Shomeres Yavam Shemesi Ima Aser Beim Alma Kasav Yesh Zika Vaz Shmuel Tamed Shmuel Loch Rav Yehuda Beveseira. So Rav Zvid is saying that you know your tradition has it all fluked up, and you have to sort it all out and figure out what Shmuel says or what Rav says. I have an explicit tradition that Rabbi Yehuda quoted his Rebbe Shmuel that you're not allowed to marry the mother of your Shomeres Yavam, which means Yesh Zika, and then everything fits into a perfect pattern because it was Shmuel himself who said Allah Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and you cannot marry the sister of Rachel because the sister of Rachel is Achos Kukoso, and that's based on the principle of Yesh Zika. So Shmuel is very, very consistent here. Now, at this point, the Gemara wants to know, why did Shmuel have to tell me two different halachas when they're really the same? They're just different scenarios or applications of the same rule of Yesh Zika. On the one hand, he's telling me that you can't marry the Yevama's relatives, let's say her sister or her mother. And on the other hand, Shmuel is telling me that halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. But keep in mind, Rabbi will say, halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira means that there's another brother, we call him Shimon, other than Reuven. So Reuven wants to marry Leah. And the problem is that she's Achos Rachel, who's Kukasa. So now what we're saying is that if there's another brother in the picture, obviously, because the case of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is where there's another brother who's going to be Miyavim her Rachel or Choletz Rachel, therefore remove the Zika. So it could be in that particular scenario where there's another brother, we would say Ein Zika. If Shmuel would just tell me that you're not allowed to marry the relative of your Yevama, so that could be a case where there were two brothers. Reuven and Shimon. Shimon died, and his wife falls for Yevamot to Reuven, but there's no other brother in the picture. And that's when Shmuel would say, you can't marry her mother because of Yesh Zika. There's no competition here for the Yibum. There's only one brother. It's Havamina Hanimili Bechad. I will betray lo. Kamash Malan. That's the Chiddush here of passing like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Because in the case of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, there's both Reuven and Shimon when Levi dies. And I would have thought that, okay, we accept Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira in that case. No, we would reject Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira in that case because they're Ein Zika. What would be the svara to say Ein Zika? Because they're two brothers. If they're two brothers, then she can't be married to both of them, so therefore they exclude each other. You know what I mean? It like blows up if there's no Zika at all. It's either all or nothing. Either there's a Zika to one brother, or if they're two brothers, then there's no Zika at all, not to this brother nor to the other brother. Because otherwise they're vying for the same Zika. She can't be married to both of them. Kamash Malan, Shmuel wants to pass like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, they yesh Zika, even in the case with the two brothers. Now let's go the other way around. The Iyashmi in Allah Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, which means yesh Zika, even in the case of Trey, there are two brothers, and then Kolshke, and he can't marry a relative, it's only one brother. Hanimili Mechayim, Avaliachar Misa Pokale Zika, Kamash Malan the Zika Bechilo Pokale. Shmuel wants to teach me a chiddush. That what? Yeah. I can't even remember. Oh, that's for a different reason. Right. Again, here's the Hamam. If Shmuel had only told me halacha to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, then I would have concluded that what? I would have said that, very good, that that since Rachel is alive, therefore, yesh Zika. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira prohibits Reuven from marrying Leah because Rachel is alive, and Leah now becomes a chos tukah. So that's called yesh Zika mechan. Okay. Now, never Rachel dies. So there was neither Yibum nor Chalitza to Rachel. So the Havamim would have been that in this case, we have no problem if Reuven marries Leah. Why? Because for sure ain't Zika. What removes the Zika? The death of Rachel. Now we shift over to the other statement of Shmuel, and Shmuel says that you're not allowed to marry the mother of the Yevamah even after the Yevamah dies. Correct? Let me just get the language here. It says, Shomeres Yavam Shemesa Asur Be'ima, which means that Yesh Zika even after she dies. And therefore, we exclude a mistaken interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. What was that mistaken interpretation? That Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira will only prohibit Reuven from marrying Leah as long as Rachel is alive. But he would allow Reuven to marry Leah after Rachel's death. Why? Because Rachel's death would completely terminate the Zika. Kamash Malon, that's what Shmuel says, Shomer Yavam, Shemesa Asura Be'ima, because Zika lo pocha b'misa. Oh, he calls it Zika b'chdi lo pocha. So there are two options of removing Zika. One is Yibum, the other is Chalitza. Misa is not an option. It doesn't give you any of the lumpus here. What was the logic? I mean, I understand why Misa should be mafkia the Zika. That makes sense. The Havamina makes a lot more sense because how can you talk about a woman being skukal yibum after she's gone? There's no yibum after she's gone. What was the maskana that no, that Zika b'chti lo poka? What it means is it's basically but now we understand why it's ima. Why is it that Shmuel says that Shomer's Yom Shemesa also be ima? He's allowed to marry her sister. That's for sure. Because even if he was fully married to her, he can marry her sister after she dies. But you can't marry the mother of your wife even after your wife dies. So we're going to view Misa. Second. We're going to view Misa as if a marriage relationship ended in Misa. Now, what are the dinim that apply as far as marrying the relatives of your wife after she dies? Well, you're allowed to marry her sister, but you can't marry her mother. And that's all based on Yesh Zika. So we have two statements of Shmuel, both of which formulate the principle of Yesh Zika. And therefore, the Gemara quotes Rabbi Zvid that our tradition is that Rabbi Yehuda said this in the name of Shmuel, in the name of his Rebbe. You have another tradition that Rav holds that after the Yevamot dies, you're allowed to marry her Ima, which means Ein Zika. Okay, that's Rav Shita. We don't have any other tradition and transmission of Rav. Second, but Rav agrees. Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to point out to you. This was the sugya we did 2 days ago. Rav agrees that during the lifetime of the Shomeres Yavam, he's not allowed to marry her mother, even according to Ein Zika. Then he is Mavatal Mitzvahs Yibum. All right. If that made any sense to you, fine. If not, I had it. Yeah. Steve, did you want to say something?
No, well, I was just in all of the classes that it doesn't matter if there's a second brother.
There's a Hava meaning that it would. That there's no, even if I hold Yesh Zika, that's only if there's one brother. Because I'm not sharing the Zika with anyone else, so she's considered quasi-ish. But if they're two brothers, then what I'm saying is it's Shnaim also the talis, but as so nobody has a tfisa in the talis. You can't say that she's kuka as ishas to two brothers. That's impossible. But the Gemara says Kamachmal no, that even in the case of Yehuda and Beseira, where clearly there's both Reuven and Shimon, both who by Yibamim, we're still going to apply the principle of Yesh Zika. We're not going to allow Reuven to marry Leah because Leah is Achos Kukas. So we see that there's a Zika, even though there's another brother Shimon, another Yavam. So it comes out that Yesh Zika applies even in 2 Yevamim and even Liachar Misa. That's what it comes out. The only way of removing a Zika, there are 2 methods: it's either Yibum or Chalitz. One second, I'm sorry. If I can. Here's where I both say what confuses me. Are you able to? What happens in the following case? Let's see, I have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. And Reuven's wife is an erva to Levi, but not to Shimon. Now, Reuven dies, and his wife, who's an erva to Levi, falls for Yibum to Shimon. Now, Shimon is married to another woman, which is called a Tzara. And now Shimon dies. So what happens is Shimon's wife plus Reuven's wife fall for Yibum to Levi. Are you with me? Okay. So what happens to Shimon's wife, if you follow, which we call it Sarah? In other words, is she called it Sarah's Erva as far as Levi is concerned? Because this woman who was Ashes Reuven was an Erva to Levi. And that Lechor should depend upon our sugya of Yesh Zika or Ein Zika. If you hold Yesh Zika, then Shimon's wife is at Sarah's Erva. Because this Erva, which is Ashes Reuven, is married, in quotation marks, to Shimon. So Shimon's wife and Ashes Reuven are now tsaros. And since Ashes Reuven is an erva to Levi, then when Shimon dies, there's no yibum even to Shimon's wife, because she becomes a tsaros erva. But that's only if you hold Yesh Zika. If you hold Ein Zika, then Shimon's wife is not a tsaros erva. You follow? Because she never shared her marriage relation to Shimon with H's Reuben. It was Ein Zika. All right, now we begin the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches. Okay. Shnei Achim Umeis Echan. So he says that Reuven married Sarah. That's the Masechet's example here. And now Reuven dies. So Shimon marries Sarah Ashes Reuven. That's the mitzvah of Yibum. As Ashes Achim. This one say here. Yeah, fine. Now, the Masechet adds that Shimon has another wife named Rivka. So again, Sarah is very, very similar to the case I gave you before. Right? So Sarah is Ashes Reuven. Now she becomes Ashes Shimon through Yibum. And Shimon has another wife named Rivka. He tells you to look here at the diagram all the way to your left on the bottom. The Achaf Nolad Lehem Af. So I guess we're going back to, he calls it Av. So the father has Reuven and Shimon. And now, after Shimon was Miyabem, Sarah, Ashes Avram, Ashes Reuven, now Shimon dies. And 1 second. Now Levi is born. And Shimon is married to both Ashes Reuven, that's Sarah, and his own wife, Rivka, Umeis. And now Shimon dies. So if Shimon dies, then both Ruvain and Sarah fall for Yibum to Levi. Okay. Harishona Yotza Mishum Eishes Achshel Ahoya Bolamo. Harishona means Eishes Ruvain. We called us Sarah. Lashvia Mishum Tzarasa. And what we said that Hashnia is Rivka, correct? So it seems that we're holding Yesh Zika. Am I right? What do I mean by Yesh Zika? That Rivka, the wife of Shimon, is a Tsaras Erva to Sarah. When Sarah falls for Yibum, no, just 1 second. What am I talking about? Shimon married Sarah, right? So that's nothing to do with Yesh Zika, my mistake. Right, because Shimon was Miyavim Sarah. So once Shimon is Miyavim Sarah, then clearly Rivka, Shimon's other wife, is a Tsaras Erva. Because the relationship between Reuven's wife and Levi, Eishes Av Shaloi V'Lamo, is Eishes Ah. She's a Tsaras Erva. Okay. So far, the Mishnah is pretty straightforward. But now it becomes more complicated. Because what happens, in our case, so far, before we get to the Sefer, is Shimon married Sarah with Yibum. But Asaba Maimon, who makes, now we have a slightly different case, where Shimon was not Miyabim Sarah Eishes Ruvain, but he gave a kesef for Shtar. Then he died. Now we're up to the Tanakama. Ashliya, meaning Rivka's wife, Oletzes Velomis Yabemis, which means that on a Doraisa level, the Maimar is nothing. And therefore, Eishes Ruvain Sarah is not a Tzara to the second wife of Shimon, Rivka, because there's no marriage relationship. But it does say, Velomis Yabemis. Why is Velomis Yabemis? I suspect that this is already Yesh Zika. You just think about this. He says, Ein Maimer Kona Bivam El Mirabah. Ein Nachshevas Legamre Ki Ishto Shel Shimon El B'Miktzas. Lefichach Rivka Chayeves B'Chalitza Milevi. On a Doraisa level, She'eno Mamish Tzaros Shel Sarah the Erva Ola, because on a Doraisa level, Maimer is not Kona. Aval Eno Misya Bemes, Lefisha Nase Tzarat Erva B'Miktzas Aydea Maimar, Shenase B'Sarah. He's really holding Ein Zika now. But since it was a Maimar, that's why there's no possibility of Yibum. Notice what gives the Sarah, we'll call her Rivka, the status of Tzaras Erva. It's not the Zika of Sarah to Shimon, because we're holding in Zika, but rather Maimon. Okay, so that's the Tanakam. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Miyabem li'ezem en sheyirtzo, choletz li'ezem en sheyirtzo. In other words, Levi, in his relation to Rivka, is smooth sailing. Rivka is not a tzaras erva at all, despite the Maimar of Shimon to Sarah. It sounds like Rabbi Shimon is rejecting Maimon completely, even on a D'Rabbanan level. Shenolad Levi kvar motz also beheter tachas ish achiv. Just Ashnia nifteres Yibu ubechalitza. This is okay. Ain't Sarah Asura Olav. Oh, I see. Oh, I made a mistake. The discussion is not about Zika or Maimon. The discussion is about the Erev of Ashes in the case of Sarah Ashes Ruvain vis-a-vis Levi. Because we were assuming that Ashes Sarah, as far as Levi is concerned, being Achiv Shloi B'Olamo, is an Erev of Ashes No. Says Reb Shimon, there is no Ashes Mishum shekshenolad Levi, Armotza osa beheter. But since Shimon was already miyabim prior to the birth of Levi, so therefore the original issues of Reuven is completely gone. Yeah, we had this with Shimon. Yeah, it's been a while, so we succeeded in putting it in the recesses of our memory. All right, so Reb Shimon's shita is that once the Yibum takes place, the original Ichus of Ruvain is history. And therefore she, Ashes Sarah, falls for Yibum. So wait a minute. Can Levi be miyabim her? Or wait a second. Rehu miyabim. Oh, Liazim and Sheyirtza. Okay. Yeah, I thought he was only allowing it to be miyabim Rivka. No, he's allowing her to be miyabim even Sarah. What does this mean here when he says Vashnia Nifteres B'Yibum? Oh, Ashnia means the other one. So the other one, like, and therefore she falls to Yibum. So it all depends, according to Shimon, when Levi was born. In this case, Levi was born after the Yibum of Shimon. If he's born after the Yibum of Shimon, then the Isser Erev of Ashes Achshel doesn't register. Because with the Yibum of Shimon, her status, Sarah, is no longer Ashes Reuven, it's Ashes Shimon. And now Levi is born into a situation into a reality where Shimon has two wives, Sarah and Rivka. With Shimon's death, both of them fall for Yibum, and he can take his choice. However, Shimon would agree that if Levi was born before the Yibum of Rachel of Sarah to Shimon, for that, then at that point, when Levi is born, then the status of Sarah through the Zika, but again, I don't know if this is called Yesh Zika, I'm not sure, but anyway, is that of Ashes Reuven. And since Levi was never shared any moment of time with Reuven, therefore Sarah becomes an error of Ashes. But anyway, let's focus our attention on our case. In our case, the Mishnah Shimon was Miyabe Sarah Ashes Reuven before Levi was born. And Rav Shimon insists that in such a case, the marriage between Sarah and Reuven is history. It's gone. It's something you can put in the archives, but it's not relevant anymore. Now, Levi enters into a world in which the reality, the given, is that Sarah is married to Shimon plus Rivka, that, and with Shimon's death, Levi has a choice of Yibum of either Sarah or Rivka. Okay, then that's what we have.
So this confused me a little bit, as we talk about this, because I thought, like in Bruce, I only said something to both daughter-in-laws at one point, do I have any more children to come from me? That would have made it sound like they would have done Yibum with, but they wouldn't have.
We even with at that point it would be Ploni Almoni.
Well, but I'm saying,
or Boaz.
right,
After Boaz replaces Paul.
but this is before, Orpah goes away and
Rusa
and
comes.
such, yeah. Because she says that, she makes it sound like, she says that by having more.
But keep in mind that we don't know that Arpa at any point accepted you. So you have to reinterpret the whole,
Right.
There's got to be some sort of, commentary here on what was she saying to Arpa. Now, if for argument's sake, which is probably not right, I would say that Rus already had Gerus. Okay, that's very tenuous, right? So then Naomi was addressing herself to Rus and telling Rus.
But this was probably she did.
Correct, because she didn't say, Elokayach Elokai and so forth. That's why I think you're going to have to interpret that whole verse or that whole dialogue between Naomi and her daughters-in-law in a non-halachic. I mean, it's not Yibum.
Right. So
it's just that she had given in her lifetime, Naomi had married off two of her sons to these two girls. Those two sons had perished. She's basically saying, I don't have a third son to marry off to, but not through Yibum.
Right. Oh, so that being in the back of my mind at the start of all this, I didn't, when they first came up with this non-contemporary brother not being, that was a surprise to me. Wasn't expecting that. Yeah.
You weren't expecting that what that
The non-contemporary brother wouldn't have been eligible for even that. Based on, just
right. But were you with me when we derived this from the Apostle?
Yeah.
It says Ki Yeshu Achim Yachdav.
Yeah. Then I
that they
understood,
also,
but yeah, I was kind of expecting a different result, before I.
So when Levi comes into the world, according to the Tanakama, before we get to Rav Shimon, he's facing Yibum to Rivka, not to Sarah. Because as far as Sarah is concerned, her status is Ruvain, and Levi vis-a-vis Ruvain is Shalohay B'Olam. Shimon went ahead and he did Maimar to Sarah, and according to the Tanakama, that engenders a status of Saras Erva to Rivka. But again, it's not a full-fledged Saras Erva. Araya, she needs Chalitza. And the answer is it can't be a full-fledged Saras Erva because Maimar is not marriage on a Doraisa level. On Drabanan it is, and therefore we're going to drop Yibum. Yibum becomes excluded under the halach of Tzaras Erva Drabanan. But I think we're assuming that Ein Zika. Because again, if it would be Yesh Zika, then this issue of the status of Rivka, is she at Tzaras Erva, would be irrelevant to Maimon. There'd be no need to just confuse us by adding Maimon. If Yesh Zika. But if you hold Ein Zika, then creating some sort of quasi-marriage between Shimon and Rachel could only be, and Sarah, could only be engendered by Maimon. Maimon replaces Zika. Rav Oshia. Again, I'm going to read it with the Masechet. He says, "Lo nechlak Rabbi Shimon rak al adin hashoni b'mishnasenu b'yavam b'yibeim Shimon es sorei shzruim l'basov." No, that the yibum of Shimon took place when? Before Levi was born. Chol koy Rabbi Shimon af b'rishona. Aha. Okay, so this is Rav Oshia. So far, we haven't exposed ourselves to Rav Oshia. Rav Oshia is now an opponent to our understanding of the sugya, because Rav Oshia is going to expand the application of Rabbi Shimon's principle even to a case where Levi's birth predated Shimon's yibum of Sarah. Let's just think about this. Levi is born, and Shimon has not yet implemented yibum, correct? So what's the svara of Rabbi Shimon in the Torah here? The issues of pain. He's going to say, maybe, I'm just thinking out loud, that maybe according to Rav Oshia, the zika of yibum is enough to undermine and replace the original issues to Reuben. Would that be possible? Where it says mimai, so mimai doesn't mean what's the svara. Mimai means what's the source for Rav Oshia. Midakatani, Mishnah Yisera, Bava duration. I see what he said. In other words, what bothers us here is that this Mishnah here in the second parak, at least the Tanakama Mishnah, let's leave out Rav Shimon, but is a repeat of what we know from the first Mishnah. The first Mishnah already tells us that there's something called Eishes Ach Shelo Hoya B'Olam. And there's no Yibum, which means automatically her status is that of an Erev of Eishes Ach. So that Rivka now is clearly a Tzaras Erev. Is Laman Katani. Why is the Mishnah repeating what we already learned from the first Mishnah? Ilaim l'Rabbanon, Hashta Yibem u'Besof Nolad, the Ashkebetera Ashku, the Asri Rabbanon is Nolad, the Achakach Yibem boy. Well, let's focus for a moment on the word hashta. Hashta, in the case where the yibum took place first, which you would say, right, first meaning before the birth of Levi. So you would say in that case that, we completely erase the marriage relationship between Sarah and Reuven, and nevertheless, Asrei Rabbanon. Where's this Asrei Rabbanon? I guess it means that the opening line in our Mishnah, that Hashniya Mishum Tzarasa, that's talking about a case of Yibem U'Besof Nolad. Yibem U'Besof Nolad. And Yibem U'Besof Nolad. Asri Rabbanon. It says Hashniya Mishum Tzarasa, and that's a case of Yivem Ulubasof Nola. You know that that's the case of Yivem. Let's read the Mishnah. Shnei Achim, Meis Echem. Oh, it says explicitly, the Yivem Hasheni, the Achakach Nola Lehem. So it's definitely a case where there's Yibum before Levi was born. And yet, the Mishnah Paskins, this is the Rabbanon, that Ashniya Mishum Tzaras. Even though Levi came onto the scene after the Yibum took place between Shimon and Sarah, and you would have said, in that case, Rivka is not a Tzaras Erev, but yet the Rabbanon consider her a Tzaras Erev. So therefore, Nolad v'Achkach Yibem Miboy. Why the Mishnah have to repeat this for the Rabbanon in a case that we could derive from a Kal V'chomer, namely in a case where the Yibum of Shimon to Sarah had not yet taken place. The Mishnah is telling me it did for Rabbi Shimon in the case of what? Nolad v'achkach Yibem. And the Mishnah wants to be machadish that even in that case of Nolad v'achkach Yibem, nevertheless, Shimon is matir Yibum. We don't know why, but I'm going to assume somehow that the Ishus to Ruvain is gone. Tana Reish Lo Dicha Kocha D'Rab Shimon v'Tana Sefer Lo Dicha L'Dicha Kocha D'Rabbanon. U'Bedinu D'Niflig Rabbi Shimon B'Reisha Elanota L'Rabbanon Ad D'Mesaymi L'Milsayu V'Hadar Poligalai. So Rabbi Shimon sort of waited until the Chachamim finished it all up, and they got to the case of the Sefer, which is Nolad v'Achar Yibem. And the Rabbanan said that even in this case, Rivka, is not considered Tzaras Erev. Rabbanan said that what? That she's considered a Tzaras Erev. So let's just see. Reisha lo diacha kochan to Reb Shimon. So the Reisha is a case of Nola. You follow me by Nola? Nola meaning that before the Yibum took place, Levi was born. And Reb Shimon went, according to Reb Oshia, even that one step further, and he applied his halacha even to that case, meaning that forget about Reuven, if you follow it. Reuven's out of the picture. And Sarah is not H's Reuven, and she falls for Yibum to Levi. On a Sefer. Okay, so the Sefer is now where Levi is born and there's already a de facto marriage between Shimon and Sarah. The Yibum took place, and Levi now is born. Lo diacha kochan d'Rabbanon, that there's a din of Tzaras Erva, even in this case. And we define Sarah as Ashes Ruvain even after the Yibum took place between Shimon and Sarah. So both extreme positions here are difficult. You know, the extreme position of Rabbanan is difficult because Shimon has already been liyabim Ashes Ruvain, but that's not so difficult actually, because okay, Shimon is liyabim her, but her status as an Arab vis-a-vis Levi is still alive and well. I mean, the fact that Shimon was Biyabi doesn't in any way undermine that erva is set in stone. That doesn't bother me so much. But Rav Shimon's extreme formulation, the way we have it now, which means that even if Levi is born before the Yibum of Shimon, which means that at the moment Levi was born, Rachel, Ashes Reuben fell to Levi for Yibum. But Rav Shimon is going to argue that it's Ashes Ach Shelo Bolama. She still should be an Ereva. Yeah, but at that point she should be an Ereva because it's Ashes Ach Shelo Bolama. What would be the logic of Rabbi Shimon to say that she's no longer that the Yibum afterwards, maybe the subsequent Yibum. Yeah, but I don't know how Yibum could remove an Erev. That's a little bit of a problem. I mean, it's already facts are set on the ground. We've already engraved it in stone. Wow. She, Sarah, is an Ereva to Levi. What is it, a pending kind of Ereva? Waiting to see what's going to happen with Shimon and Sarah. I don't know. I mean, or is it Lamafreya that somehow if Shimon is Biyabim Sarah, then Lamafreya, Igloy Milsa, that she, Sarah, was never the Erev of Ashes. I don't know how that works. Okay, that's I think the biggest problem in this. Ashes Achshlo Hayvalom B'Shimon Ashes Kafes Lo B'Chad Acha. So Reuven marries Sarah, who Reuven dies. V'nolad lo ach. Okay, so Shimon is born. Everybody agrees that Sarah, Ashes Reuven, is an Erev of Ashes Ach Vizvi Shimon. We're only two brothers, right? There's no Levi over there. Shimon, there's only Reuven and Shimon. Shimon was born after Reuven dies. He says, "Ba'ofen zel l'divrei kol Sarah asura al Shimon because zikas bein achiv shelo haya ba'olam." I don't know why does he have to emphasize the zikr? Forget about the zikr. She's Ashes Reuven. That's an Ashes Ah. You have to add the zikr. That's my question. He says that the reason why Sarah is Asura al Shimon is because of Zikas Reuven Achid. What is that about? I mean, what am I missing here? The Torah says that there's no Yibum in the case of Ashes of Achiv Shelo Hayvalom. I don't know why I have to mention the word Zika over here. I mean, she's an Erev of Ashes and there's no mitzvah Yibum. So why does he add this phrase that Sarah Asura al Shimon because Zikas Reuven Achiv? I don't get those words. What am I missing? All right, so okay, that's not the. Yeah, I'm sure I'm wrong in that, right? But I just don't know why.
Reuven died, there was nobody to be a Zika relation. There's no brother in there.
Correct.
That's not what they're saying.
And Shimon is not in the parsha of Yibum here because of Reuven's wife because it was Lo Haybolamo. So therefore, she says Shesach without Yibum. I mean, that we know. I mean, that's the elementary ABC of the Masechet Yevamot.
Right. I mean, they're saying that because he was born afterwards, there's no strength of Zika relationship.
But he's saying that the Isser on Sarah is because Zika. What does that mean? Because I don't know the words. Don't you have an English translation? It's this right here.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
Oh, you do have. Oh, that's for the next year. What does he say on the words? Bechad acha umis v'nolad lo ach. Does he have any explanation there? Because if he adds the word zika, then I'm in trouble because